Okay, I just ran the entire gauntlet. You know, that thing where the cartel beheads a guy? Yeah. So, in order to get my mind off of that, why'd I do that? That was so dumb. In order to get my mind off of that, we're gonna be doing some more SCP reading. Part freaking like 17 of the Ouroboros. Can someone tell DJ Caddis to not write so much? To maybe go outside so I can? Like, dude, what? Why do you write like you're running out of time? Writing at night like you're running out of time. Um, okay. So last we left off, they were spilling secrets about each other, they were bonding, and there was character development. And so now, we're on to SCP-001, the way it ends, 7, step 001/7, which is 057 with green. Green. Caucasian female, British German ancestry, appears to be in her early 50s, the first member of the council to be voted into it rather than appointed by 051 after the previous 057 was determined no longer useful by the rest of the council. Is believed to have at one point been a site director, though any records of this has long been since modified or outright removed. Regardless, it is believed that 057 has been working within the Foundation nearly her whole life, having joined as an administrative aide when she was only 14, has become an apparent leader of the council and controls a considerable amount of the authority in that position, while a veto from 051 would theoretically subvert her assumed control. That veto has never occurred. Perhaps the most often seen member of the council, she has attained the name Green due to her nearly always being seen in green pantsuits. Some high-level sources within the Foundation staff have given her another name, Flytrap, often described as the most sinister member of the council. While other members might have diabolical intentions or ulterior motives, O5 alone has the authority to make everything she intends to happen come to pass. She's often described as working towards some ends, though her goals are a mystery. I thought she was called Green because she was either a type green, a reality like shifter, or she was green, like actually green, like the Wicked Witch. I thought that would have been like a really cool thing, but no, she's just a normal white woman. Chapter 7, The Fly Trap. Then, a young boy stands in a long line of men and women on orange jumpsuits. He has a metal collar around his neck. He's marched outside into the cold with a shovel in his hands, and as an adult with a flamethrower pushed back the encroaching flesh, he pushes the ashes into a small pile to be collected. He is thin and sick. Their camp hasn't received ration in 3 days, but the guards stay fed. There is a commotion and bullets whip across the frozen earth. The boy dives for cover behind a pile of fleshy corpses and covers his ears against the screaming and shouting around him. It lingers for a moment, and then silence. When he opens his eyes, Anthony is picking him up, leans down to picking him up. The older man throws a warm blanket across Adam's shoulders and carries him to a waiting personnel vehicle. Aaron Segal stands at a platform delivering news of a breakthrough to their first assembly of the new Foundation. He beams as their audience applauds. The incredible Ivory flees down a dark alleyway in the three Portlands. Foundation agents fast on her heels. She has run, for what it feels like hours, and throws, and knows she does not have much left to give. She hears dogs barking and her legs burning like cinders. She catches sight of another agent rounding the corner in front of her, so she stumbles down a side street. It opens into a quiet intersection, but she can hear them approaching all around her. Exhausted and resigned, she collapses in the street, paint and blood smeared on her clothes. She laughs now, seeing the mess. Well, she thinks, at least they'll give me something to change into. A moment later, a car screeches to a halt in front of her, and Calvin pulls her into the car. When the Foundation agents exit the alleyway, she is nowhere to be seen. A phone is ringing. In the distance is a mountain of fire and sound of roaring machines and the continent being shundered. The earth shakes. Aaron keeps the car straight on the road even as it bucks and buckles beneath him. In the back seat, Aaron is staring at the floor. Through a small crack between two rocks, a man squeezes through and shortly by his rucksack, he strikes a match, filling the chamber with light. Small white insects, those that haven't seen the light in 100 generations, scurry for cover. The man lights his lanterns and starts forward. There's a draft from somewhere beyond this room, so he follows it. He ducks carefully under rock formations, tenderly brushing against them as to not disturb them. A bat flies low overhead, and he is encouraged. This must be the right way. He presses on, and from somewhere not far off he can hear the sound of rushing water. It opens into another cavern, but before he can get his bearings, his foot snags on the edge of the walkway and he tumbles to the ground, his lantern dashing and shattering against the ground, spilling oil and fire in every direction. He hurries to stand, rubbing his eyes where he'd struck hard stone. Before he can move to put the fire out, a miracle catches his eye. In front of him is a waterfall, small but dozens of feet high. He approaches it cautiously, extending a hand out into the waters he can see flow up and around his hand. He splashes the water, which continues to flow up and out of the pool at his feet, towards some point in the dark far above him. In the dimming light of that cavern, standing before an impossibility, Frederick Williams grins. Okay. So we've got a lot of information. Adams, we already knew was a D-class from Russia. So we've got Anthony, after he was Arians, saving him. We've got proof that Aaron Segal went back to the Foundation to become 051. We've got Calvin and Olivia met. She was a street magician, or art monkey, or whatever they call them. We've got Aaron and Arians moving towards the broken god. We've got a phone is ringing, which is symbolism for the children. And then we've got Frederick Williams, the administrator, finding an upside-down waterfall, which I guess technically you would list as 001. So actually, I can just stop reading now because we found out, by the way. Adam burst into a clearing. Oh, this is now, by the way. Adam burst into a clearing, hands slapping at his face as he swerved and ducked away from the great many tiny assailants. Olivia wasn't far behind, followed closely by Calvin and Anthony. Of the four of them, Olivia had fared the best in the jungle. Calvin had slipped and fallen into quicksand, which now covered his lower half, as if he was an ice cream man cone. Anthony was drenched head to toe in sweat from the humidity, and he grumbled and fumed each step of the way at the dog shit heat. Except say it in a British accent. Lastly, Adam had earned the attention of the swarm of bugs, which, to his telling, had now followed him for the better half of the last mile since their car had broken down. Calvin called a general halt to their progress to survey a map and some notes he had received from Delta. Of the seventh overseer, the journal had been scant. She moves often, but Delta had been watching the movements of one they call Green for weeks. True to the journal's description, she had moved more frequently than any of the others, often staying at a location no more than a few days at best. But here, deep in the heart of these forests, she is said to be staying for over a month. "Oh, I don't like it." That's Australian. "I don't like it," Anthony had said, chewing at the end of his cigar. "This feels like a trap." "Yeah," Adam had answered. "We don't actually know if she's there, either. We just know that we haven't seen her leave. There are plenty of ways she could have gotten out." Calvin had stroked his beard at the thought, catching Olivia's eye from across the room. They are not in a room, they are in a jungle, before she quickly looked away. "You're right, this is profoundly sketchy. But if our sources are correct, and she where we think she is, we might have another chance at this. We have to act now." So it was that when they arrived in Cambodia, Anthony shouted, tearing yet another piece of his shirt away from his body. "Cambodia, if all places. If the bugs won't kill you, the heat will. He pulled a fan out and began fervently waving it in front of his face. "I've had enough of this part of the world for one lifetime. If I ever spend another day in these god-awful jungles, it won't come soon enough." Calvin surveyed their map, noting a nearby river as a landmark. "We're close now. Once we're in the city, we need to meet up with Vanderveer. He'll be there, in this bar. He has contacts that can put us where we need to go." He pulled out a bandana and started wrapping it around his face. "Put something up around your face. We need to stay as discreet as possible." He stuck a finger towards Adam and Anthony. "You two pasty faces stick out." Anthony grunted, but Adam whipped his head around, face red from sustained smacks. "Hang on, what now? Why do we need to hide our faces?" Calvin tucked his map and journal away. "Same reason the Overseer's here right now. Political unrest. Vanderveer says there's an artifact of some kind being held by local revolutionaries, and that Green has come in personally to treat them and get it back." Adam's face ran white. "Why is an Overseer coming to treat with revolutionaries?" "Don't be fooled," Anthony said, slinging Adam's canister around his shoulder. "This isn't a diplomatic mission. Green gets off of this kind of shit. If she's here, it means something disastrous is about to happen." After quickly cleaning themselves off and covering their faces, bless me, golly, and the four of them crept back into the brush in the direction of the jungle, in the nearby city. I don't know why I said jungle, I'm so sorry. Calvin slunk behind a wall as a group of rioters passed by him, torches illuminating the dark streets. Somewhere not far off, he could hear the sound of gunfire and car alarms, the occasional loud boom of a tank as the government moved troops into the city. He waited until they were gone, and moved quickly towards the east. They had gotten separated early on after a mob had formed around a grocery they were passing. Anthony had radioed in that he was fine and moving towards the target, and Olivia and Adam had met up a few blocks later. Under the orange fabric of an awning, he saw a single light illuminating a sign, Pedro's Place, and an open door. He slipped through it, and the sounds of the street faded behind him. Pedro's Place had emptied out earlier in the day when a brick had come in through one of the front windows, but a handful of patrons still sat in the bar. The broken glass had been swept into a small pile in the corner and left untouched. Calvin entered casually, not wanting to meet any of the eyes that were crossing the room in his direction. He found a seat near the back of the small room at a table in the far corner and hunched down to hide his features. After a moment, the bartender came by his table. "What you have," the bartender said, in broken English. I do not want to do a Cambodian accent. Calvin knocked on the table twice, then twice again, then 3 times. "I'll have what he's having." The bartender paused, then nodded and left. A few moments passed, and another man returned to the table with beers in each hand. This man was a stout individual with fiery red hair and a lit cigarette burning in the corner of his mouth. He took a seat across from Calvin, sliding one across towards him. "Cheers, Calvin," he said. "Drink up. We'll likely be dead in the morning." Calvin grinned through his handkerchief, but he quickly removed it. "Van," he said, "aren't you a sight for sore eyes?" Vanderveer shrugged. "Must be pretty sore, then." He took a drink. "Where's the rest of your band of merry men?" "I was promised a raiding party, not a single over-the-hill operative." Calvin snorted. "We were separated. Anthony is moving ahead to the watch point, and Liv and the kid are on their way. We should meet them on our way out." Vanderveer nodded. "Once they arrive, we'll need to move quickly. We don't have the abundance of time to act. If the riots dissipate, we'll have lost our opportunity. Our only cover right now is the street full of looters, and we're just a handful of tourists." They were interrupted by a barking dog outside, which quickly faded into the hum of the background. Calvin took another drink. "What's going on out there?" "Local politics," Vanderveer said. Curvier came in and set up a number years ago and thoroughly fucked the water. They were doing what they usually do, come in, set up, dig furiously, and then wait until the jailers come and force them out. Only this time the Foundation didn't show up. He laughed. "You probably had a hand in that." It was Calvin's turn to shrug as Vanderveer continued. "Anyway, there were 3 sides to this. On one hand, you have the local officials, all of whom are receiving kickbacks from Curvier and are seen as betraying their countrymen. Then you got these folks, let's call them revolutionaries, who have come in to overthrow the government for a while. When the details of Curvier ordeal came out, they decided it was their time to shine and rose en masse. They're holed up at the governor's manor, supposedly meeting with the local governor to reach some agreement. The fact is, they're only there so that Green can stoke them and dispute the agreements and send the country into civil war. Once it's properly destabilized, the jailers can swoop in and raid the armory that they're keeping this thing in, so they want to get their hands on so badly. Who are the people in the street? Calvin asked. Rioters. They're just unhappy with the government. Most of them are probably aligned with the revolutionaries. Not all of them do. Mostly they just want to riot. They're dissatisfied and angry and want to loot and pillage. They're the most dangerous of these three sides right now, because if their attitudes turn violent, they could sweep in before we get the time to get out of Dodge. The sound of the street outside grew louder for a moment as the door opened and a man and woman stepped through it. Calvin nodded and Vandiver stood. Time to roll, the husky Irishman said, for the insurgency. I'm not doing an Irish accent either. Calvin took his extended hand. For the insurgency. Olivia and Adam fell in behind them, and the four of them snuck quickly out a concealed side door. As they passed the bartender, the man gave them a nervous nod. Once they were out on the side street, Vandiver pointed towards the lights in the distance. That's where we're going, he said, voice rising slightly to be heard over the din of the crowd. The revolutionaries are set up there. To get inside, we'll need to meet with one of my contacts, Joe. He looked down at his phone. I was hoping to have heard from him by now, but there's not really much time to wait. Let's go. They took off in the direction of the governor's manor, sticking mostly to side roads to avoid the rioters and larger gatherings. As they paused to let a mob pass, Calvin pulled out his radio and called Anthony. Anthony, he said, do you read? Where are you? The radio crackled a response. Made it to the watch point. There's a throng of ne'er-do-wells down here pillaging an electronics shop, so I've gone to the roof. Where are you? We're leaving Pedro's now. Any sign of the target? Not yet. She should be pretty easy to spot with that jumpsuit and all. The radio was silent. Be advised, Calvin. There's a lot of troops moving in and out of the manor now. They keep coming out onto Main Street here, and I don't think anyone on the ground has noticed. Things turn sour here. I think they're going to break up really badly. Calvin took a deep breath. Roger that. We'll meet you soon. The four of them skirted past a burning shop and down the narrow street with a tight bend at the end. Approaching it, Vandiver held up his hand, and they all stopped to peer around the corner. He tore back and swore. Looters, he said. He pulled a sidearm from its holster. Don't do anything stupid. He sidled around the corner as the rest of them were not far behind. As they approached the group of people emptying a store of its contents, one of the looters noticed them, and then they all did. Vandiver sucked in his chest and smiled, extending his arms. Evening, lads, he said with as much gusto as he could muster. Just passing through, see? Don't want any trouble. Got money if you want it. No troubles here. One of the looters looks back towards the others, and then they turn back towards the group, nodding. Vandiver produces his wallet and stepped forward slowly, holding it out in front of him. There you go, he said. Nice and easy. Suddenly, bullets zipped through the crowd of looters, and men and women began falling over each other. One of them pulled a gun and began firing into the dark behind them, and then everyone had guns. Van turned to run back towards the other three, but a stray shot caught him in the leg and he collapsed, cursing. Calvin ran up and grabbed him as he fell, and the three of them started to pull him off the street. Vandiver looked back towards the group of rioters, his eyes growing wide. Gas, he said, pointing. Jailers. A cloud of gas had formed over the bodies of the dead and dying looters, which had crept towards the group. Out of the gas emerged dark shapes with masks and rifles and riot gear. Even from the distance they were at, Calvin could make out the insignia on their shoulders. 9-tailed fox. Oh shit, Adam said under his breath. Suddenly the group was in a near sprint, with Calvin heaving the hefty Vandiver over his shoulders to keep up the pace. They darted down side streets, but no matter where they turned, more armored shapes emerged from the shadows. They turned around and found themselves at a dead end. Fuck, Olivia said, turning back towards where the group of Foundation agents now stood at the entrance to the alley they had walked into. Vandiver swung around on Calvin's shoulders, firing furiously at the agents. One of them collapsed, then another. A bullet pinged off one of their masks, and the agent disappeared behind the rest. Then, one of them produced a thick steel canister, pulled a tab, and rolled it towards them. A thick orange gas blew out of the can on both ends, filling the alley. Calvin moved to run forward, but each step into the cloud felt like 1,000, and suddenly he was as heavy as lead. He heard Vandiver swear as he fell from Calvin's shoulder, and then he heard Adam hit the ground, then himself. Then the world went black. Calvin awoke, cotton-mouthed and groggy, unable to see through a dark band wrapped around his eyes. He felt for his wrist, cuffed, and his ankles as well. He reached as far backwards as his hands could, and he felt something cold but very alive. Olivia. Somewhere nearby, he heard an unmistakable sound of Adam snoring, then a voice. "Captain, Captain, Captain," it said slowly, steadily. Never mind. "Captain, Captain, Captain," it said slowly, steadily. It was a rich voice, vaguely southern, full-textured and hearty, and clearly female. "Golly!" "Captain, Captain, Captain?" The voice was someone very sure that where they stood. "I should start giving you the mental scouting missions more often, when you come back with prizes like these." Another voice, this time male, harsh. "Are these the insurgents?" "Yes, I believe they are," the woman said. Calvin heard footsteps and then nothing. "This one is out of place. We're missing one." "What do you want me to do with them?" this man said. The woman paused, considering. "Well, no point in waking him, I think. All in all, a better way than what we have in store for the rest of them." There was a heavier sound as the man, clearly in boots, crossed the room. Calvin heard the sound of a bullet sliding into the chamber, and then the ear-piercing pop of a gunshot. Calvin jumped, and he heard Olivia scream behind him. "Look, look, they're awake. Get them up, hurry, we don't have a lot of time." More footsteps, and then Calvin was yanked forwards by 2 sets of hands. The hands pushed him against the wall, and another pulled the blindfold off his face. He squinted against the glare of the lights, and as the room became more clear, he was met with the sight of a short, squat woman in a dark green pantsuit. She wasn't old, maybe early 50s. She wore black shoes with a green flower on them. She was leaning down, looking at him quizzically, like some sort of bird of prey lurking over its meal. Calvin turned to his left and right, confirming that Olivia and Adam were there and generally no worse for wear. He glanced into the corner of the room and then quickly back. Vandiver lay dead on the ground, a bullet hole placed between his eyes. The door of the room cracked open. "What was that?" asked the man on the other side. "Who you shooting?" The woman in the pantsuit waved them off. "Don't worry about it. I'm dealing with a personal issue. You understand? Personal. Personal. That means no you. Scooch." The door slid closed, and she turned back towards the group, smiling. "Well, well, well," she said, clapping her hands together. "And here I thought I was going to have to spend time looking for you 3, and you walk right into my trolls. That's just something. I tell you what. Bless your hearts." Noticing that Olivia was staring at Vandiver, the woman gestured dismissively. "Oh, don't you worry about him, Sug. He went quick and easy. You'll about have to have a harder time, I'm afraid." She turned back towards an open window. From outside, they could hear a throng of revolutionaries in the street. "Introductions! Where are my manners, goodness? My mama would have whooped me for that. My name is unimportant. You can just call me Green. Everyone does, hell, you probably do too. As for you 3, she paused, finger held against the side of her face. "The skinny one here is a runaway D-class. The skinny bitch is an anarchist who got away, and you, why, you're Calvin Lucien, aren't you? Tired of lobbing grenades at unarmored convoys, you decided to step up to the big leagues and crack at some overseers." She laughed a warm, wholesome laugh. "I gotta hand it to you, Calvin. You got some balls. I don't know if it's in the water where you're from, but it's pretty potent stuff. Some of my own could use a tall glass of that. Green turned back towards the window. Now, I know what you're here to do. Hell, we all do by now. Some of my fellers decided to turn tail and run for their holes as soon as that little stunt you pulled with poor old Felix. Very clever, by the way. You know what's funny is that Felix himself had worried about that a long time ago. In order to assure him, Aaron had the fountain drained and the ground upturned so there was nothing left. Yet, there you were, doing something that shouldn't have been able to be done. Very, very clever. She continued, but while they might be content to hold up for a while until this blows over, I've got work to do. The Foundation doesn't run by itself, and it certainly doesn't run if there's no one telling it to do so. Besides, she turned her head to look back at them, her eyes steely and her smile crooked and devilish. This is the most alive I've felt in years. Calvin grunted. You're a peach. Georgia laughed again. Georgia grown. Isn't that fitting? She crossed the room in a hurry. So here's what I'm going to offer you, Calvin. Something of a wager. Have you ever watched a fly at a fly trap? That's the most natural gamble there is out there. The fly is gambling that it can make it down to the sweet, sweet nectar and out before the fly trap snaps shut. The fly is willing to take that bet, though, because the nectar is so good and it's right there. She pointed at Adam and Olivia. I'm going to offer you lives for a life. Easy. You let me kill one of them too. Your choice. I'm not unfair. And I let you do whatever you want to me. Kill, maim, butcher, whatever. Or, and here's where it gets interesting, you refuse and I leave this room, go into that room, she pointed a pudgy finger at a door that had opened earlier, and put a bullet into the neck of Yinko something or whatever, the revolutionary leader. You and your friends here might make it out alive, but as soon as that throng in the street finds out their golden boy was gunned down by the troops now firing on them, they'll let the whole countryside of that. Green squatted down in front of him, both hands held out in front of her. That's where it is, Calvin. That's the nectar. It's right there. All you gotta do is reach out and take it. Calvin struggled against his restraints. One of the guards beside him put a butt of his rifle into Calvin's back, knocking him over. Fuck you, he said. Calvin rolled her eyes. Green rolled her eyes. You should have learned something in the words and gone to church when you were younger, Calvin. Take me, Calvin heard Olivia say next to him. Her voice was hoarse. Calvin, she's gonna kill one of us anyway. How are we gonna get the chance? The woman laughed. She's right, Calvin. Someone's dying tonight, and you decide who. Come on now. We don't got all night. Ping Pong isn't a patient man. She motioned at him, and the guard sat him back up. Fine, Calvin said, spitting up blood. Shoot me. Let those two go. Green didn't laugh, but her smile grew unusually wide. No, Calvin. That's not how the game is played. You don't get to choose yourself. You think this is some sort of noble sacrifice you'd be making? Now she laughed. You wouldn't have thought, after so many years of losing, the insurgency would have figured it all out by now. There are no noble sacrifices, Calvin. Here's what will happen. You choose one of your friends, or those people out there, and I live or I die. If I live, I go back to work, and we replace the overseers you killed. It certainly won't be the first time. If I die, you get to feel like you've won something in the moment, and you are either killed by the masses outside those doors, or you killed by our agents, or you die of the flu, or whatever. Maybe you kill another overseer. Gene is looking wobbly right now. He'd be a good target. Either way, eventually you'll reach a point where you have exhausted your efforts, and you'll stop trying. You'll run into a mountain you can't climb. And trust me, that mountain is coming up soon. You'll realize that this tower was built to not be climbed, and you'll give up. As soon as you give up, none of the deaths mean anything. Doesn't matter if it's you, or it's me, or it's her. She stood up, hands still outstretched. You know what makes sacrifice worth it? Propriety. You either keep going and live forever, or you die and history forgets. The worst part is, honestly, you have no idea what you're doing. Calvin opened his mouth to talk, but Green held out a finger to silence him. I know what you think you're doing, but honey, you were messed up from the word go. To think that people will stop... You think that killing people will stop the Foundation, and well... She paused, pensively. You should ask Aaron Segal about that. Hard to kill an idea. Now, this is alluding to how Aaron Segal tried to kill the Foundation, and then he turned coat and ran from the insurgency. What a bunch of losers. She turned the hand back over. Last chance. Make a choice, Fly. Calvin struggled against his restraints for a second more, and Green sighed. Fine. You know, this is actually what I wanted in the first place anyway. She gestured at the guard, who strode towards the door. Olivia shouted out and lunged towards him, but was rebuked by the end of his rifle. He kicked the door open and fired 3 shots through the doorway. There was shouting on the other side, and then he fired again until the shouting stopped. He nodded to someone in the door and walked through, followed by other agents. They heard another door open in the next room and the sound of something wet and heavy hitting concrete. The crowd outside went silent. A moment later, there was a single gunshot, then thousands. The mob erupted and the earth began to shake. More gunshots filled the air, and they could smell the distinct scent of gunpowder and searing flesh. Green turned to gather her things. You know what I said earlier about fly traps? Here's the funny thing about that. Even if they don't make it for the nectar, it's too late. They won't get out. The fly is made to do all sorts of things, but the fly trap is just there to catch the fly. But they keep coming, because that nectar sure does look good. She turned to look at them. I wonder who will be next. Suddenly, Adam was on his feet, his cuffs and a nail clattering to the ground. He had taken 3 steps when Green had her gun out, inches to his face. He stopped suddenly, legs shaking, and Green cocked her head and smiled. Oh no, she said. Sorry, honey, but it's not gonna be you. Calvin saw a flash of light outside the window, and then Green was stumbling backwards, clutching her hand and cursing. Blood rushed between her fingers. From the table next to her, a confiscated radio cackled. Run. It was Anthony. Adam snagged a key off the table as Green ran out of the room. Once unshackled, Calvin collected their weapons and the radio. Anthony, he said, running into the next room. Do you have eyes? Where's she at? On the roof, Anthony said. There's a helicopter landing right now. I'm on your way. As they rounded the corner, 3 of the revolutionaries stormed up the stairs, guns drawn. They opened fire on the 3, forcing Calvin behind a table and Olivia back into the first room. Calvin returned fire, catching the first man in the shoulder and forcing him back. Olivia blind fired but missed. 2 more of them were coming up the stairs behind them, and more could be heard below. Calvin could barely hear over the crowd below, over the din of the helicopter above. Calvin reloaded, but out of the corner of his eye, he saw Adam sprinting around the corner behind Olivia, something long and slender in hand. Before Calvin could shout at him, Adam had thrown the spear of the non-believer, cocked back, and aimed at the men in the stairwell. In that moment, before he loosed it, Calvin felt the air get sucked out of the room. Silence filled the space where the noise had been prior, and the lights dimmed. He grabbed his chest, unable to breathe, and managed to get a good look, just enough, over the table towards the stairwell. There was the roaring sound, like a locomotive passing over them, and a blast of light and heat. The spear ripped through the air towards the men on the stairs, piercing each of them in succession and embedding itself into the wall behind them. As it passed through them, they burst into flames and were quickly reduced to ash. The last sound of their lips being a faint whisper of a scream before being silenced forever. Calvin stood up unsteadily, his expression covered with disbelief. Adam stumbled backwards, bracing first against the wall, and then Olivia as she came behind him to scoop him up. He ran a finger through his hair, eyes wide and mouth hanging open. Holy shit, he said quietly. I don't know what I was expecting, but... Oh, God. No time, come on, Calvin said, before realizing that Adam could barely stand. Olivia, stay here with him. Anthony, We'll be up there soon. I gotta get Green. Olivia nodded. Calvin bolted towards the stairs, towards the roof, taking the door with a lowered shoulder and bowling out into the platform above. The helicopter was just a few steps away, and Green was standing on the railing. When she saw him, she extended her hand in greeting. "This is it, Calvin." Her voice cut over the sound of the helicopter and the crowd below, which was now in a frenzy. Fires had broken out across the entire quad, with more cropping up in the distance as the city began to burn. "This is the world of your actions. I hope it was worth it." Calvin pulled out his firearm and fired at her. He missed once, then twice, then an explosion rocked the building and his gun fell from his hand. He reached to grab it, but it was too slow, and disappeared over the edge of the roof. With Green laughing over the noise, the helicopter began to ascend. Calvin felt someone come up behind him. Anthony planted a knee onto the ground, then, taking aim with his scoped rifle, fired a round. It pinged off the metal just beside Green, whose eyes grew wide with something like glee seeing him. "Ah, Vince, you were too late. I'd hoped you'd have a chance to catch up with you." She blew him a big kiss. "I'll tell Aaron you said hi when I see him next." Anthony lined up another shot, but was wide when he pulled the trigger. The helicopter continued to climb. He fired again. Nothing. Then something streaked out of the crowd below them. A rocket. It arced into the air and disappeared into the open door of the helicopter. For a moment, nothing happened. Green didn't look like she'd even seen it. Then scarlet filled the sky as the rocket and the helicopter both burst into flames and fell into the earth. The blades were spun out into the crowd, and a flaming mass of metal struck a nearby building. The fuel exploded in the wreckage, and the building collapsed into the crowd below them. Another explosion rocked the ground beneath them, and then another. Overhead, low-flying shapes came into view, moving quickly past them and away into the distance. Moments later, fire lit up the horizon, drawing closer towards them. Another wave of shapes passed by. Jets, and then more fire. One of them struck the street outside the governor's manor, causing Calvin to stumble. Anthony caught him by the jacket and pulled him to his feet. "Time to go, kid." They sprinted to the rooftop access and then down the stairs where Adam and Olivia were waiting. Motioning for them to follow, Anthony led them down another stairwell into the kitchen. They danced around falling pots and pans as more explosions sent shock waves through the walls of the manor, the mortar and brick beginning to give way in places as the ceiling around them cracked and splintered. They turned one corner, then another, and then a third, and led them to a side door that Anthony lowered a shoulder into, flinging it open and emptying them onto a street. They stood between the now crumbling manor and the building adjacent that had caught the flaming helicopter as it fell from the sky. At the end of the alley, they could see a mob converging on soldiers who had opened fire into the mass. Above them, more planes screamed overhead and more bombs fell into the crazed populace. Anthony turned back to the other end of the side street. "Down there," he said, pointing to the end of the street. "There was a carpool when I came into the back. There's liable to be something in there now we can—" He was cut off short by the scream of something unnatural. Turning back towards the flaming wreck of the building next to the manor, they saw a fiery figure step out of the wreckage. Its skin had slothed off half its face. One arm had been severed just above the elbow. It stumbled out into the street, trying to balance onto rapidly melting legs. Its eyes were entirely gone, and what remained now were empty sockets of smoke. The figure turned towards them and opened its mouth, a foul moan etching out from its charred throat, drowning out all sounds around them. It took one step towards them and then another. Instinctively, Calvin fired at it, and the bullet tore through flesh and bone, but it still itched forward. The figure moaned again and raised its hand, leveling a gun at Calvin's chest. He realized too late what it was, but by the time he heard the crack of the gunshot, he was on the ground already. Standing over him was Anthony, hand clutching the side of his neck. Another crack. He stumbled backwards as Olivia screamed and fired back. Blood was pooling underneath his shirt. There was a third crack and the sound of a bullet ricocheting off pavement as the holder of the gun collapsed into a smoking, smoldering, unmoving pile. Anthony turned back as if to walk away and fell, only barely avoiding slamming into the concrete as Adam slid underneath him to break his fall. Calvin scrambled to his feet and rushed over. Blood was now pulsing out from under Anthony's fingers on his neck, and more was seeping through his shirt. Olivia was trying to keep pressure on the chest wound, but Anthony waved her off. He took a breath, then another. Each felt like it lasted an eternity, but each was more ragged and uncertain than the last. Calvin stood over him, blood now spattering on his shoes each time Anthony coughed. The helplessness of it all began to close around him like a shroud. Then he felt something, a weight he had forgotten about and suddenly remembered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crystal vial of clear, shimmering fluid. He held it in front of him, the lights of the fires behind him dancing across its surface like fireworks in the rain. Adam saw it too, and his eyes drew wide. Olivia had stopped what she was doing, and they were all watching Calvin. Almost unconsciously, he brought his other hand to remove the seal. "No!" Anthony croaked through the spittle and blood. "Calvin! Don't! No, don't!" Olivia looked back towards him, tears streaming down his face. "Anthony, please, please, we can save you, we can—" The older man shook his head. "No, not like that, no." His eyes, which had until this moment been unfocused, now locked onto Calvin's. "My mistake. Mine. Not yours." Calvin hesitated, his hand still inches from the seal of the vial. And then, as quickly as he produced it, he slid it away into his jacket. Anthony sighed. "Vincent," he whispered, his voice hoarse and barely audible over the din. "Arians. It was my name." He raised a hand towards Calvin, who took it in his own. "Here now, for you. Anthony." Then, after one more shallow breath, Anthony died. Calvin was the first to stand. He took several deep breaths, trying to desperately not think about it. "We need to go," he said. "The carpool." He said there were cars. "We need to get out of here." Adam looked up, his eyes red behind tears. "We can't just leave him here. We can't." He turned towards Olivia as if to beg her, but she was already frantically digging around in her bag. After a second, she produced a thin brush and a small container full of light blue paint. She motioned for Adam to stand back, and the young man took 2 hesitant steps away from Anthony's body. With a swift, deft hand, she ran long lines of paint across the body. At the spots where the lines intersected, light shined through the colors of the paint as if underneath it. She ran several more lines, and then more crossing those, and then back. Anthony's body was covered with many thin lines of glowing blue paint which blinked and pulsed slowly. She leaned forward over him, then leaned to kiss him on the forehead. Like lightning, the lines all lit up at once. Each of the individual cells created by the crossing lines began to change until they were cloudy and opaque, as if he was covered in many pieces of stained glass. They all solidified into a glass cocoon around his body. Olivia brought up the other end of her brush down into the center of the figure, shattering it. The glass collapsed, and suddenly the air was filled with a prismatic cloud of crystal butterflies, each sounding a single note of a song that played around them over the chaos of the flighting beyond. They swung around the group once, and then away into thin air. The glass was no more, and Anthony's body was gone. Calvin grabbed the 2 of them, and then together they raced down the alley towards the back of the manor. More explosions lit up the night sky, and dark figures raced into the woods outside the city all around them. When they reached the car lot, half the vehicles were on fire, and 10-meter craters were carved out of the ground where they had been. They scrambled through an open gate and surveyed the scene. "Shit," Olivia said. "What are we going to do?" Without warning, a military jeep came around the corner behind a patch of trees, stopping in front of them. A door opened and a man climbed out, his features hidden beneath a hood and bandana. "Take the car," the man said. "Drive north until you're out of the country. A map and glove box will take you to your next contact." He looked to see the flaming city behind them. "Is the overseer dead?" Calvin nodded. The man didn't move. "And Wright?" None of them responded. The man paused, then handed a pack to Calvin. "This is food, water, and munitions that will last you till you reach the checkpoint. You must hurry. The overseers have already killing squads, roaming the countryside looking for you." He took a few steps towards the tree line, then turned back. For the insurgency. For the insurgency, Calvin echoed. The man disappeared into the woods, and the three of them climbed into the jeep. As another bomb dropped nearby, they tore out of the lot and onto the dirt road, heading north into the dark forest. Okay. This is the journal entry for the 7th Overseer. The 7th Overseer. They call her Green. In my travels, I have had an audience with many of the higher-ups in many of the organizations that deal with the paranormal in this world. In one such case, I sat in a meeting with a Russian intelligence director and a high-ranking member of the Global Occult Coalition. In this meeting, it was being discussed whether or not action should be taken against the GOC to prevent the Foundation from furthering their influence in Syria, as a powerful humanoid entity had just been discovered there, and steps were being taken by many different groups to step in and intervene. It was thought that this entity was likely being targeted by the Foundation, though it was uncertain how far along their plans had progressed. In this meeting, the Russian director assured the GOC commander that they had full support of the Russian paramilitary forces in the region, and a full 20,000 men if needed. The coalition had a contingent of their own, another 25. As if more than enough force to bring out any entity to bear, especially if they could get the jump on the Foundation. During the meeting, the Russian director stepped out to make a phone call, and when he returned, the Russians had decided to withdraw their troops from the area. The coalition commander was furious, of course, but his rage quickly abated when the director told him why he had changed their mind. Green is in Syria. One woman, alone, had entered the country and sent two of the largest paranatural communities scurrying for their bunkers. The meeting ended shortly after, and all involved parties left without saying much else. I asked a staffer afterwards what the significance of green was, and I was a fresh-faced agent at the time and not yet informed. Green, they asked me? Green is the devil that sits on the Overseer Council. I learned over time that her reputation barely scratched the surface of her influence. More than any other member of the Overseer Council, Green's name came up more frequently when matters of the Foundation's involvement in the affairs of the world were discussed. When a government would collapse in South America and the CIA was implicated, her name would be somewhere along with all the dossiers. A ship had capsized in the South Atlantic, would have her name manifested. Once, there was an explosion at a chemical plant in Bangladesh, and while combing through the photographs of the cleanup, whose face did I see in the background but Green? Always present, always watching, carefully planning. Speculation abounded, of course. Everyone in the paranormal investigatory group thought that they were her endgame. The coalition thought she was in leagues with the factory. The UIU figured she was working for Covier. The Russians thought she was the Scarlet King. Even my contacts at the Huge had her name contacted to drug lords in Mexico, dictators in Africa, and telecom groups in Indonesia. Despite this, no one could ever clearly put together where the center of her web was. A close friend of mine, who died many years ago, once called her the Spider and warned me that she was the closest of all the Foundation's all-seeing eye. They warned that getting too close to the center of the web would put a person within the reach of the Spider, and by then it was too late. But another contact of mine told me a different name, one mentioned in hushed tones around water coolers within the Foundation. The fly trap. Not a web, but a trap for those too dumb or instinctive to seek out its hidden secrets. Once you were in, snap. In my career, I tried to give Green a whole berth. Every time I saw her name connected to someone, it was because they had died suddenly or had been involved in some terrible or inexplicable accident. Even if I know my limits, and I was not eager to come involved with someone who could cause such powerful groups to cower in fear. Despite this, I did once meet her on accident. I was at a luncheon hosted by the Tunisian government and ran into her when I went back to the bar to get another drink. She was there, pantsuit and all, enjoying an old-fashioned and watching a television. When I came up and ordered, she turned to me and smiled with a friendly smile and shook my hand. She introduced herself, telling me to just call her Green. When I gave her my code name as cover, she winked at me and said, "Honey, we both know that's not true." I paid for my drink, wished her well, and left the meeting immediately. That was the closest I'd ever come to hope to the mouth of the flytrap. Signed, L. Golly, that was 50 minutes. Well, let's look on the bright side. Anthony's dead, and I no longer have to do a dumb little British voice. This is number 8, step 001/06. 05-6, the American, Caucasian male, Spanish ancestry, appears to be in his mid-50s. The least subtle member of the council, 056, is a former American Union Brigade General Rufus King. After fighting for the North in the American Civil War, 056 was appointed to Minister of the Papal States, believed to be the first individual to meet the administrator while in Rome. The source of his longevity prior to supposed deal with death itself is unknown, and if the current understanding of the council is correct, then despite his appearance is by far the oldest member. 056 is believed to have founded the first mobile task force, Alpha. Oh, by the way, he's called the American. That's real subtle. 051, Red Right Hand, whose original purpose was strictly to find and destroy members of the fledgling Chaos Insurgency after its formation. Alright. Since then, he has administered all matters of Foundation's executive branch, the Department of Applied Influence, encompassing all task forces, naval groups, and air superiority groups. While not originally advocating for its formation, 056 supposedly drew up the original organizational information for MTF-07 Pandora's Box at the behest of General Bow. Has gone by several different names within modern military circles and is believed to have held office at the Pentagon since its construction. Oh my god, this dude caused 9/11. Which SCP caused 9/11? Dude, this Green caused 9. That is great. His standing within the American military is unknown, though at least 3 major sources have confirmed that many military leaders consider his authority second to only the sitting U.S. president, and several believe he supersedes that. Now I'm really curious, which SCP caused 9/11? Chapter 8, Sic Semper Tyrannis. That's Latin, I'm sure. Then, Arians stood in the doorway, slowly pulling on a cigarette. Aaron was sitting at a table a few feet away, flipping through a report they had just done the day before. Outside the window of their makeshift command center in Guadalajara, a parade danced through the streets, slowly working its way towards the center of town. The window was left open for the faint breeze, but it hadn't helped. Arians took a long drag on a cigarette, letting the smoke fall out of his nostrils as he exhaled. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. I don't know what you were expecting. Didn't this confirm everything we've heard so far? Aaron shook his head. Yes, it did, but I don't understand it. They mobilized an army to La Paz. How is that possible? He flipped the report over, looking for loose pages. What we did in San Marcos should have ruined them, Vince. Who was left afterwards? Plenty of people were left. What do you mean? Aaron threw him a look. I mean, who was left in command positions? Who knew how to... Did any of them know how to get into Site-01? He tossed a report onto the couch behind him. We didn't leave the door unlocked, did we? Who was left? Arians shrugged. And Solshaw, maybe? Last time we heard, he was operating out of a site in Michigan. But it couldn't have been him. He wouldn't know how to get through the secure site, though. He paused, considering. Skidder Marshall? Where was his team assigned? Aaron rubbed his eyes. No, it wasn't Marshall. He defected too, just not with us. They sat in silence a moment longer. Only the sound of the parade moving in the distance breaking the quiet between them. Then, without warning, the door of the room opened. Arians was at an instant gun drawn. Aaron didn't move, but stared unbelievingly at the figure inside the doorframe. Sophia? He asked incredulously. Sophia Light stepped through the door, slowly pulling a hood down off her face. Her hair was shorter than when they had last seen each other, but her eyes were still the same unmistakable green. Aaron felt something catch in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Longing. No, Arians growled. Foundation spy. Sophia rolled her eyes. Put the gun down, you idiot. I'm not here to kill you. She rolled up the sleeves of her gloves, revealing holes in both the wrists where they had long since scarred over, but not closed. She had no hidden weapons. There, satisfied? What are you doing here? Aaron asked. She pulled the coat off and sat it on the single bed in the bedroom. You sent a message to Edward Bishop, she said, looking at him. Aaron, 0513. All the same melodramatic pros as ever. I knew it was you. He added to the file we'd had in place for the... She paused. The children. See, Edward still believes the lie we've been telling everyone. And what's that? Arians asked. That he, or any of us, are still in control. She sat down across from them and lit a cigarette on her own. Aaron could feel his heart crashing against his chest. Your defection really did a number on us, boys. Scattered, leaderless, all of our best and brightest killed or gone into hiding. We threw together a hodgepodge of doctors and called them overseers, but none of them actually running the show. She paused. Not even me. Aaron frowned. Then who is? We don't know, she continued. For years, the overseers have been running the individual sites by themselves, but orders keep coming down from Site-01. Somebody is in there. For a long time, we thought it was you. She looked at Aaron and her gaze softened slightly. But after a while, we realized it had to be someone else entirely. She leaned back and closed her eyes. I know you went back. I was following you. You saw exactly what I saw when I went back. A man-shaped absence where Frederick, hearing her say his name, made Aaron wince. Used to be. Smoke on the wall, nothing else. She took another long drag on the cigarette. So, if you're not in there, and he's not in there, then who's calling the shots? Arians finally lowered his gun. Why are you here? She glared at him. Because the other day we found something that shouldn't have been possible. Site 19, the facility we had built when we scrapped the plans for the Alaska site, there was a door there that we hadn't seen before. There was a whole new wing behind it, something that couldn't have been there or built without us knowing. She swallowed hard. In that wing is a room with a statue in it. We didn't put it there. No records of it being put there. We checked the file, and it says it was just moved there. There wasn't a file before. The date on that file changes every year, and that statue is one of the most horrible things I've ever seen. She stood up. I'm here because something is happening at Site-01 that is changing the Foundation. New facilities are being built every day, more and more doctors and researchers being recruited that we know nothing about. You saw what happened in La Paz. They both nodded. Those orders didn't come from any of the overseers. They came from Site-01. Somebody in there is calling shots, and the Foundation is following orders. She paused. I don't agree with what you did, and I think the Foundation has more to offer than you give it credit for, but what's happening here needs to be stopped. We need to know what's going on in there before it's too late. Then why not just go? Arians grunted at her. She looked at him for a second, then away at the ground. I don't want to go alone. Aaron and Arians exchanged glances. If we find something in there, Aaron said slowly, we're going to kill it. You understand? The Foundation can't be allowed to continue like this. Sophia, the damage it's doing is more than we can keep up with. We've been looking at the numbers again, the ones we the ones we borrowed from Dr. Shaw, and his figures match our own. The Foundation is destabilizing our reality, Sophia. Williams was right about the threads, but they're being damaged. We need to stop this. He met her gaze as she looked back at him. I know we're scientists, but this is a box we never should have opened. She opened her mouth to speak, but stopped and sighed. She nodded. Fine. Get me in there, and you can do whatever you feel like whenever you need to. Arians nodded. I'll radio headquarters. We'll have some kind of distraction to keep them off our backs while we take Site-01. He put the cigarette out on the wall and left the room, closing the door behind him. Sophia watched him leave, and once he was gone, her eyes went back to her hands. Aaron didn't move. I wasn't sure I'd see you again, he said softly. She smiled, an uncertain half-smile, her eyes betraying her. Well, yes, I wasn't sure either. She looked back at him, and Aaron could see the great sadness behind the facade of content. It's difficult, you know. I lost everything that night. My friends, my mentor, my life's work. And you. She bit her lip until it was white. I didn't know where to go. You left me, and I was alone to pick up the pieces of what we had, and her voice trembled. I don't want to know why you killed Frederick. I don't care. Maybe you knew something you didn't tell anyone else. But I don't know why you didn't tell me. Aaron's face went white. I did want to tell you. I was preparing for what we were planning, and I told Vince to let everyone know. He leaned forward. He didn't tell you? She grimaced. No, he didn't. But neither did you. You had every opportunity to reach out for me. You knew all the channels, and you did nothing. It's been 30 years, Aaron. 30 years, and I hear nothing. Not even a word that you're still alive. A tear formed at the corner of her eye, and with the back of the glove she wiped it away. When I saw you and Vince in San Marco, I thought I was seeing a ghost. I'm sorry, Aaron said softly. I thought you rejected the deal that... I would have rejected the deal, she said, her voice conjugating into something venomous. I dedicated my life to that foundation and the projects, and you were all too willing to throw it away. Everything we'd worked for, all our efforts. Aaron slumped back into his chair. Williams was. I know what he was, she spat. But he could have been dealt with. When you killed him and broke off to go gallivanting around the country, shooting up convoys and stealing from warehouses, you threatened all of the work we'd done. Do you remember why we did it? Do you even care? Our world is sick, and if we can't find the source of it, we're going to keep seeing... The world is sick because of Williams, Aaron said pointedly. He was the source. He was. But here we are, 30 years removed from Frederick Williams' life, and you know what's happening out there? She paused to light another cigarette. More unexplainable events every day. More artifacts and monsters we pull off the ground every day. Why, if the Administrator was the source of the anomalies, are we still seeing the anomalies, Aaron? Aaron didn't answer. She sighed and sat further onto the bed, pulling her legs to her chest. I might have believed you back then, she said quietly. I might have listened. I might have seen nothing But I have seen nothing in the past decades that would lead me to believe that one man was the advent of every paranormal event in that time. There's something deeper out there, and it's not going to be stopped by killing a man. It's going to be stopped by research and investigation, and the only group with the resources to make that happen right now is the Foundation. Aaron didn't respond. He sat, eyes downcast, as Sophia finished her cigarette. I'm not going to stop you from doing whatever you think you need to do, she said, her voice empty. But before you do anything, you need to think about what it is you actually want. She looked back towards the door. And if it's what he wants, too. Okay, so the Sophia White looks like she kind of convinced Aaron to go back to the Foundation, because... What? They killed Williams because he was a bad man, and they thought he was the source of the anomalies, so they torture 9 kids, and they erase him from existence, and then they formed the Chaos Insurgency thinking the Foundation would die, but now it's not dead. It's all very complicated. It feels like I'm reading Game of Thrones. Now, this is present day. They drove overnight, Olivia and Calvin taking turns at the wheel while Adam slept in the back seat. They didn't say a word until they reached their destination, a small inn in a tiny town on the edge of the jungle, a few miles from the main road. They pulled off and parked at a petrol station, and Calvin went inside to meet their contact. It was morning, the sun had not quite risen, and they were exhausted. The agent they had met in the burning building had given them not just a map, but a key and a note card with a room key on it. Calvin entered and climbed the stairs to the 2nd level and found the door that matched the card, quietly, as to not disturb anyone who else might be listening for him. He locked the door and crept inside. A thin stream of light from a street light outside had eased its way through the thin blinds on the window, but otherwise the room was dark. Calvin closed the door behind him and took a few tentative steps into the room. He paused mid-step when he heard a distinctive click of a readied firearm. "Does the Black Moon howl?" the voice behind the gun said. "It's the only thing that howls," Calvin said. A small desk light clicked on to the cot against the wall. Sitting in the chair was Kowalski, gun in hand, a thin bead of sweat having very recently eagerly formed on his forehead. He sighed when he realized it was Calvin. "Thank God," he said, wiping his brows. "I didn't know if I could shoot someone if I had to. Target, sure, but a person?" He grimaced. "It's good to see you, Calvin." Calvin did a double take. "Kowalski? Why have you, of all people, are you doing here right now? Was there no one else they could send?" The portly man frowned. "You know, I was an agent once, too. It may have been a few years, but I could still probably get the job done." He pulled on his shirt slightly and uncomfortably, aware that they both knew that was a lie. "But no, I'm here because there's something you need to know. Our sources have indicated that the American troops are landing on a beach near where you just came from. Ostensibly, they're here to quell the rebellion, but the numbers don't seem to match their intentions." Something clicked in Calvin's brains. "The jets. We saw bombers last night." Kowalski nodded. "They were coming from the Gerald R. Ford, who was anchored a mile offshore. There's something else you need to know," he continued, "is that there's another ship in that group that doesn't match any other Navy U.S. ships on the record. It's flying an American flag, but our sources believe it's a Foundation destroyer. Maybe the Scranton or Wormwood. Either way, probably means one thing." Calvin nodded. "The Overseer." "The 6th Overseer." Kowalski nodded as well. "They're going to try and smoke you out, Calvin. We can get you out of here right now if you want to get out, but..." He grimaced again. Calvin knew why. The American was probably the most well-known of the overseers, but arguably the hardest to get near. His involvement within the U.S. military had no doubt led to the explosion in size and technological advances over time, and in result, the military acted as a steel curtain around him. Away from the United States, he was the least vulnerable, even if he brought an army with him. It was their only opportunity. "What you've gotten done so far is nothing short of incredible, Calvin," Kowalski said, leaning back against his chair. "I never would have thought... we never would have thought that anyone would get this close, but this one is different. There's nothing clever you can do here. This is a hammer, and you are a nail." Calvin frowned. "Appreciate the vote of confidence." "I'm serious," Kowalski said. Suddenly, Calvin noticed something different about him. Some quality he hadn't seen before. Something stern and authoritative. "You've done amazing work, but you need to keep doing amazing work. We might get a shot at this one later, but you gotta finish the others. Maybe this will help. But right now, you're 3 people in a jeep in Southeast Asia, and you have an American military division a few hours away." He sighed. "You're no good to us dead." Calvin hesitated for a moment, considering what Kowalski had just said. Before he could make up his mind, the other man continued. "There's one more thing, Calvin. We have agents who have evidence of another secure container being moved out of Site 19 and onto that ship. Whatever's in there, they're no doubt planning on weaponizing it." "If you were me, what would you do?" Calvin said. Kowalski laughed. "Fortunately for us, I'm not you, because I wouldn't be here right now." He paused. "Here's the way I see it. You got no chance in a head-to-head anything. You're outnumbered 3,001, and that's generous. Honestly, I don't think you got a chance of being sneaky either. This army has spent the last 4 decades rooting up people out of holes in the Middle East. There's not a chance you wouldn't be found." He paused again. "You know, I met 056 once, back before I joined Delta at a government function. I didn't know who he was, but if he did, he didn't act like it. I don't know if there's a more arrogant and braggadocious person in the entire earth. The way he talks, he was the man who single-handedly built the most powerful military in the world." He laughed. "Maybe he did, I don't know. I don't think you'll win here by being smart, Calvin. I think you win by forcing him to do something stupid." Calvin nodded. "Maybe." Either way, I don't see a way we can leave. We're not going to get shot again, and everything we do this comes to be much harder if we don't eliminate him. Kowalski stood up. I agree. I don't envy the position you're in, and I don't know anyone more qualified than you to be in it. The two of them walked for the door, with Calvin opening it slowly. After catching a look from Kowalski, he shrugged sheepishly. Don't want to wake anyone up. Kowalski laughed. Oh no, you won't. This whole town is empty. They got wind of what was coming and abandoned their homes last night. As they stepped outside the inn, the sun was just beginning to go over the tops of the trees, and a thin fog hung in the air. Adam was awake, sitting in the back seat of the Jeep and running his hand along the metal canister the spear was in. When Olivia came to around the car and saw them, she did an abrupt double take. Delta? She said. What are you doing here? Delivering bad news, I'm afraid. Kowalski looked back at Calvin, his eyes morose. Do be careful, Calvin. You're so close now. Without another word, Kowalski turned and began walking down the dirt road. He continued on till he was out of sight. Olivia turned to Calvin. What did he mean? Calvin grimaced. The sixth overseer, sometimes called the American. He's an old Union general, one of those ghosts from a long time that just refuses to die. He's also really easy to find. He's got an office in the Pentagon. So what's the bad news? Bad news is he's nearby, not that far from here. Olivia shrugged. Does it sound bad? We don't have far to go. Calvin gestured with uncertainty. Not quite. Kowalski says he brought an American army with him. They landed on the beach back in the city, and chances are they're moving inland looking for us. Adam was listening now. How many is in an army? Calvin considered. About 10,000 men in a division. They'll have some naval and air support too. The jets we saw last night were probably U.S. planes. He crouched down, looking at a rock next to his shoe. I'm all ears if you have any ideas. What did Delta say? Adam asked. Calvin snorted. That he's an asshole. Shockingly, I know for a guy that doesn't go anywhere without an invading force behind him. He sighed. Either way, we need to put some room between us and them. The way I see it, if we head further north, we'll find a spot we can post up for the night, and see what they'll do next. They agreed, and together the three of them loaded into the Jeep and followed the winding dirt road towards the hills in the north. For a while they could see the smoke rising in the far distance over the trees, but as clouds gathered above them and the rain began to fall, the world behind them faded into the same shade of molted gray. The road quickly morphed something more traversable into a muddy, impossible bog. They drove for hours, stopping only once to refuel from a nearly empty tank at an abandoned roadside shop. Day turned to night, and eventually the road turned to a gravel path leading up to the mountains. They reached a short outcropping from which they could see several miles over the trees, and backed the Jeep into a small grove of trees. Sufficiently satisfied that they were not visible from the road below, they retreated below a rocky overhang to stay out of the rain. Calvin posted up for first watch, and the three of them traded shifts throughout the night. Now, I kind of don't believe Adam would stay awake that long. Dawn broke on Olivia's watch, and the three of them collectively broke their meager camp. The rain had subsided, but only just, and the skies were still cloudy and gray. While Calvin finished packing, Adam stood at the edge of the cliff, quite fuming at the sky. Something up there pisses you off? Olivia asked, passed by him with a rolled bedding pad under her arm. Adam shook his head. I hate cloudy weather. This is bullshit. He stared at the clouds a little longer, then slugged off to his computer in the Jeep. Olivia shot Calvin a look, and Calvin rolled his eyes. In the distance they heard a crack, and then another. Then there began a rumbling somewhere in the jungle, and from their perch they could see trees collapsing and smoke of engines as something came to push its way through the trees. Calvin swore, and they looked to the sky. Dipping just below the clouds was a flying thing, white and metallic, that disappeared back into the overcast as it disappeared. A drone. All right, well, time to go, he said, leaping into the Jeep. Looks like the party found us. They came skipping down off the outcropping and back onto the soaked and sloppy roads back towards the north. As they pulled away, a hulking metal shape came through the trees a half-mile away and leveled a long cannon at them. Calvin jerked the wheel right and into the brush as the shell burned past, throwing up mud and debris as it exploded in the road. Calvin righted the wheel and caught another path towards the west, and they continued on. Over the sound of the jungle and their own engines, the noise of war machine grew behind them, louder and louder. Overhead, they could hear helicopters and jets, and in the near distance, the sound of more tanks and heavy equipment leveling the forest as they pursued the group. Eventually, the trees thinned out and the jeep broke into open grassland. "Fuck me," Calvin said, craning his neck to watch the skies behind them. "We're exposed." The sounds of blades came fast and loud, and 6 helicopters were suddenly on them. Calvin pushed the jeep around and onto a hill into a dusty, narrow valley. One of the helicopters came into view above them and began to fire. Calvin hugged the jeep against the rocky wall, and Olivia came from the back seat with a scoped rifle. She braced it against the metal frame of the vehicle and put her eye into the sight. Cut it!" "Cut it!" she shouted at Calvin, who laid on the brake until they came to a complete stop. The helicopter turned to come around at them again, but broke hard to the left as Olivia swiftly lobotomized the pilot with a bullet. Adam stared at her, perplexed. "Aren't you an artist?" he asked. Olivia shrugged and reloaded. "I was. I've been doing this longer." Calvin crept towards the edge of the valley and cut through a small passage between 2 steep cliffs. Another helicopter came into sight as they crested one of them, and Olivia took her shot. The bullet missed the pilot but hit a rotor, causing the crank to sink violently and out of sight. Calvin made another turn and one more over a ridge, and then they were out from under the mountain. In front of them was a road winding into the craggy land past the fields. It pushed towards the grasslands and then, not far from where they were now, straight into the Badlands. Calvin took his foot off the accelerator and they coasted to a stop. "Ah, shit," Olivia swore. Sitting between them and the Badlands were military vehicles, hundreds of them, each trained on their jeep sitting on the hill. Above them, helicopters circled, and Calvin could make out the shapes of drones just above the cloud layer. Somewhere in the mass of tanks and assault vehicles, a horn blared, and the door of a personal carrier slid open. A man climbed out and closed the door behind him. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a hearty beard and mustache beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He was wearing a brown jacket over a red shirt with jeans, and on his feet were tall, glossy, oiled boots. He stepped forward from the line of guns and waved at them, motioning them to drive down the hill. "Is that him?" Adam asked, his eyes poking beneath the back seat. Calvin nodded. "Sure looks like him." Olivia peered down at the man. "What's our play here?" Calvin drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. "We could try and ram him. If we got to him before we climbed back inside the vehicle, that might do it. But I don't think we'd make it that far." His eyes scanned the long line of metal pointed at them. "We could bolt back the way we came, but I don't think we'd make it that far." "Not a lot of great choices here, boss," Olivia said, smirking. Adam leaned around the seat. "I think if they were going to kill us, they would have done it easily now," he said. "Maybe we just drive down and improvise?" Calvin turned to face him. For a moment he gave a steely glare, threatened to put a hole in Adam's forehead, but then he laughed. "Staring down the face of certain death, and your idea is to wing it." He shook his head. "Incredible. I love it. Best option we've had so far." He pulled the wheel around and brought the jeep down from the hill and rested a few yards away from the man in the cowboy hat. They parked and Calvin climbed out. Before he turned away, he leaned back to the other two. "If things get hairy," he said, "one of you jump in here and gun it. I'm not saying you'll make it, but you'll never know." With that, he turned back towards the man in the cowboy hat and stopped just short of the jeep. "Morning," Calvin said. "Morning," the man said, smiling. "You must be Calvin, that fella that everyone is talking so much about." Calvin shrugged. "Might be. Who's asking?" The man laughed. "You're a little smart-ass, ain't you? I like it. The name's King, Rufus King. You ain't no doubt heard about my exploit as a number of the secret underground associates, and let me assure you that my loyalties to country come first. So believe me when I say you, whether or not the boss man would like to hear it, I'm coming to you today as an American citizen, not some man in black or anything." Calvin raised an eyebrow. Admittedly, not what I was expecting. The American shrugged. "Look, son, a man's got to look out for his interest, and there is nothing I am more interested in than the ongoing safety and security of the United States of America. Full stop. I got into this game because I wanted to be able to better anticipate the threats posed by the natural and unstrange, and by God, I've seen my fair share. During that time, I've been able to oversee projects that have strengthened the security of our great nation, and by way of new technology or other such advances that the paranatural offer us." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes, slid one from inside, and caught it in his teeth. He lit it with a flick of a lighter and took a long draw from it. "Yes," he said, "we have benefited immensely from our pact of cooperation with the Foundation. Hell, I wouldn't even be sitting here today if it weren't for those benefits. We've got a good thing going here, and I was hoping to keep it that way for a good long while." His expression darkened. "But then you come along and snatch our get out of jail free card when you pushed poor old Felix down that shaft. Now, I'm not dying of old age or disease anytime soon. The Foundation took care of that a long time ago. But now I'm susceptible to the old matter of harms, and by extension, so is the United States. That, I'm afraid, just won't do." He pointed back towards the Jeep. "However, we got something back there I think can reach some sort of agreement. I'm no monster, Calvin. Just an old-fashioned South Carolina boy in good standing with some powerful people. I don't need to see any bloodshed for no reason, so I'll make you an offer. Might just be the best offer you're going to get." Calvin squinted at him. "I'm listening." The American smiled again. "How about I let you and your two comrades go there, scamper back off into the woods, and in exchange you hand over that spear you got your hands on." "The spear?" Calvin did a double take. "Why do you want the spear?" The American flicked at the end of the cigarette, sending ashes scattering across the ground. "It is a funny thing, that spear. I can't imagine how you got your hands on it, because we had it locked up tighter than a witch's cunt. Probably don't even know what it is, do you?" "I know what it's called," Calvin said. "Sure thing, but you don't know what it is." The American laughed. "When we found that thing, it was locked in some old dusty grasp of some ancient king. Definitely cursed, though. The lives we spent just trying to pry that poor bastard's grip. Well, I'll spare you the details. Just believe me when I say it took some doing. That spear there is the spear that used to pierce the side of Jesus Christ himself, the only one in the world that could have done it. How it ended up in that Roman's hands I'll never know, but it did the trick then, and apparently it can do the trick now, too. See," he continued, "that spear is old, Calvin. It's got some sort of magic about it you don't see anymore. The things it's capable of surpass anything, any army or bomb I could come up with. You think if Jehovah or Cthulhu or some flying spaghetti monster descended from the heavens decided to fuck up the United States, we'd have any kind of weapon that could deter their advances?" He shook his head. "No, we do not. But that spear could. That spear can kill gods, Calvin. I don't know if there's any more deadly stick in the entire world, but maybe the whole goddamn universe, and it's sitting in the back seat of your car now." He held his arms open. "So there's the deal. Give me the spear, and I'll make America safe again, and you get to go on your merry business of your lives, killing overseers, overthrowing governments, whatever you want." Calvin considered this. "You understand that you're part of this too, right? It's not a coincidence that you're next." The American cackled. "Am I? I always forget which number I am. Just that I'm somewhere in the middle of the voting call." He took a long drag of the cigarette. "I wonder how much when we found Green's crusty corpse back in that town. Between you and me, Calvin, I didn't much care for her either. A little too much power gone to the old noggin, if you know what I mean. I'm sure plenty of us seem crazy, but that old bird was a different brand." He pulled his pants up slightly by the belt. That said, I certainly will not stop you if you want to try and kill me, but that will be after we've concluded negotiations here and you've handed over that spear. Calvin shook his head. I can't do that. The American smiled again, but this time there was something sinister about it. The sincerity of his expression had run dry. Yeah, I was worried you'd say that, he said, adjusting his belt. You know, I could kill you right here, right now, with no effort at all. Could done so last night when you three were hunched in a cave in the middle of the woods. It would have been easy, Calvin, and really, this decision should have been easy too. But you've made it difficult for us, and now we have a decision to make, he sighed. I don't know what you think you're trying to accomplish, and frankly, I don't give two fucks about the ideological war that you think you're fighting. All that matters to me is getting that spear, and as easy as I could just take it, that wouldn't be very sporting. Besides, it's been a little while, and I've got some muscle to flex. He pointed in the sky behind Calvin, who turned to see a Chinook helicopter descending through the clouds with a massive steel crate strapped to its underside. In that box, the American said, is something nasty. So nasty, in fact, we've been trying to kill it for years, but we just haven't had any luck. He tapped a finger against his head. What I think I'm going to do is this. I'm going to let you go. I'm going to climb up. I'm going to let you climb back into that Jeep, give you a little water, and let you drive off to the hills. Then, after a few hours, I'm going to point that box in your direction and open it. If what's in that box doesn't get you first, I'll have the boys here roll over whatever's left and scoop up that spear on the way back. We'll call it a training exercise. He flicked the cigarette butt over towards Calvin. That's what we'll do. I like it. Seems more fair. Calvin glared at him. What if I pull a gun on you right now? Kill you here? The American laughed. I asked myself the same thing. You see, the difference between if you try and kill me here and if you try and kill me... See, the difference between if you try and kill me and I try to kill you is that I'm definitely gonna kill you. You pull a gun on me here and the 7th Infantry turns you and your friends into dust. Or, alternatively, you can march out there into the rocks and dirt and die out there only a little later. Either way, your little journey is drawn to a close. All I think that's left for you to decide is how you want it to end. Calvin stood there for a moment longer and looked back at the Jeep. He climbed into the driver's side seat and fired up the engine that slowly began driving towards the line of tanks and guns. As they did, the vehicles all pulled out of the way, revealing a road into the Badlands and allowing them to pass. As they pulled alongside the American, the man put a hand on Calvin's door. He leaned in and smiled at Olivia and Adam and tossed a half-full canteen into the back seat. Y'all have a safe trip now. He slammed the door. We'll be seeing each other again here real soon. Calvin put his foot on the gas, and the Jeep sped off into the long road into the hills. Once the long line of the Americans' division had disappeared into the distance, the three of the men began to breathe easier. Calvin wiped his brow with the back of his hand. Smooth kid, he said to Adam. Improvising was a good choice. Adam, though, was not happy. Yeah, I guess, he paused. Why didn't you just give him the spear, Cal? Calvin looked back at him through the rear view. It's important that we hold on to it. Giving it up isn't an option. Adam's brow furrowed, and his next question didn't come out of his mouth, but from Olivia's. Where'd you find it? She asked. Calvin was quiet for a moment. When I was younger, my mother and I tried to escape my father. He was a drinker and liked to hit us when he wasn't drinking. When we got out, we went to the countryside where my aunt lived. We used to take walks through the fields and the woods, just her and I. Those were some of the happiest times of my life. Then one day, he continued, we were walking by a lake, and she said she recognized somebody out in it. When I turned and looked and I saw the bodies, maybe hundreds of them, she was walking towards the lake and then into it and disappeared. I went in after her, and I could hear the bodies talking to me. And I saw my mother, and she just smiled and sank into the waters, and I never saw her again. I fought through the corpses for hours, and nobody would believe me that she'd been taken into the lake. He sighed. I went back there recently. I hadn't been back since my aunt shipped me off to boarding school. When I got back, the bodies were gone, and the paths to get there were overgrown, but the lake was still there. While I was there, getting my bearings, I guess, I was approached by someone He hesitated. I could barely remember what they looked like even immediately after they left. I don't know how you describe them other than they sounded tired, empty, like the voice of someone superimposed over a ghost. What did they want? Adam asked. They told me two things. They told me my name, and they told me that I was an agent of the insurgency. I assumed they were the Foundation or GOC or something, so I shot at him. He laughed. Seems stupid now, but I had no idea who they were. Still don't. They come up all spooky-like, and well, either way, the bullets passed straight through them, like they weren't even there. They told me to relax. They didn't mean any harm, and they just wanted to give me something. I followed them through the woods until we found a spot below a cliff. There were these sort of brambles in between us and the cliff face, and as we walked through them, they sort of melted away. Once they were there gone, I saw it. A metal door in the rock, with the Foundation arrows on it. This person, whoever it was, opened the door and led me inside. There were some old filing cabinets full of papers and a ton of dust. I bet no one had been in there in decades. This person pointed towards a door on the far end with a little narrow room and tells me there's a tool past the door that I could use to destroy the Foundation. They told me that if I chose to go in there and take it, I'd have to make a horrible choice. And if I could do that, I could have it. Olivia frowned. What was the choice? Calvin took a deep breath. When I walked through the door, I was suddenly out by the lake. Only I was a kid again, and I was walking with my mother. I don't think it was a dream. I reached out and grabbed her hand, and it was real. Then, he paused. Then we passed by the lake again, and I saw her walking towards the water, and there were so many bodies. I started running after her, and it was different this time, because I knew what she was going to do before she did it, and I was just an arm's length away. I could have grabbed her, or tackled her, or kept her from going in. When I was younger, I just froze up until it was too late, but this time I could do something. I could save her. He tapped his finger against the steering wheel. But as I came up behind her, something stopped me. When I looked back towards the tree line, I saw this person who led me to the door, standing there at the edge of the forest. They were just standing there, and I realized then, I think, that they had always been standing there. They were watching me, and in their hands they had this metal cylinder. He nodded towards Adam, who turned the cylinder over in his hands. All of a sudden I knew if I didn't want to go to them now, I'd never get the choice. He swallowed hard. So I turned back and went to the person in the trees and took the canister from them. When I turned back towards the lake, she was already gone. He wiped at something with in his eye with the palm of his hand. When I came to, I was standing by the lake again as an adult, but I had the canister. I had always had the canister ever since that day when I was a kid by the lake. They all sat in silence for several seconds before Calvin continued. This person, whoever they were, they came up beside me at the lake and told me my name, and I was an agent of the Foundation. They asked me if I remembered them, and I told them I did. They handed me something else, 2 vials of water. When I asked them who they were, they didn't tell me. But something about the way they just looked at me was just perpetually sad. I took the vials, and then they told me they were sorry. I blinked and they were gone. Christ, Adam said, sinking back into his seat. I'm sorry, I just thought it was a really good spear. Calvin snorted. It is a really good spear. You saw what it did to those guys in the stairs back in the city. He shook his head. No wonder Uncle Sam back there wants to get his hands on it. He rubbed his chin. Once I realized what it was capable of, I gave it to Liberty for safekeeping. The library for safekeeping. Best place you can put something if you never want it found. Olivia was thinking. Hang on. she said. If this person who gave you the spear when you were a kid and the vials more recently. Wait, hold on, I lost my place. I was looking at a fantastic comment I got on my YouTube studio. Actually, I'm going to pause this and read it because it looks long. It was some guy saying that no one should subscribe because I had 69 subscribers, and that was hilarious. But then I looked and I had 70 subscribers. So I'm sorry, dude. I'm sorry. What was I saying? Give it to the library. For safekeeping, best place to put something you ever want to be found again. Olivia was thinking. Hang on, she said. If this person gave you a spear when you were a kid and the vials more recently, then where'd you get the journal? Oh no, I wasn't kidding when I said I stole it, Calvin said matter-of-factly. I got a hint from one of our friendlier coalition contacts that Skidder Marshall had taken to keeping this on his person when he was trying to decipher it. I always knew he was going to be in Berlin 2 days before the Von Mar Gala last spring, so I happened to find myself on the sidewalk when he was getting out of his car and jacked him. Jacked him, Olivia screamed. You mean, like, punched him? Christ, Cal, isn't Skidder Marshall, like, 90 years old? Oh, yeah, absolutely flattened the lad, Calvin said, grinning. Don't feel too bad, though. I think he's probably had to pull a few of the Mountain of Youth at some point in his past, so he's still looking in pretty good shape. Once he was down, I snatched it from his coat pocket. Didn't he have bodyguards or something? Olivia asked. Well, hold up, Adam said, his eyes growing wide. Is that what you were having me doing? Calvin burst out laughing. Oh, that was perfect. I had Adam fuck with their GPS. They were a street over and had no idea what was going on. The only person Marshall had nearby was his driver, so I punched that guy too. Adam rolled his eyes. You had me break into Google Maps so you could punch an old man. Absolutely, Calvin said, nodding furiously. Just clocked him, too. After a few hours later, the clouds overhead cleared. Adam leaned in and looked out at the sky and smiled. Finally, he said with relief. Clear skies. Calvin looked back at him. Enjoying the weather? Adam was quickly pulling up his laptop and slapping his antenna to the side of the Jeep. I had an idea earlier, but I wanted to check up on something first. He stared at the screen as information danced across and his face lit up. Hey, Delta said that American is a cocky son of a bitch, didn't he? Calvin squinted at him. Language, young man. But yeah, that's definitely the point he was trying to get across, I think. Why? Adam's hands danced across the keyboard. Do you think he'd violate Chinese sovereignty? It was Calvin's turn to look surprised. He might. What do you have in mind? Right. So you said that Delta was our best bet to try and get him to do something stupid, right? Calvin rolled his eyes. Get to the point. Okay, Adam said, nodding slowly. Okay. Yes, okay. So I have this tragic story for my youth that is about to come useful. Calvin and Olivia snorted in unison. Go for it, Calvin said. Lead the way. We're actually really close to the town I grew up in, Adam said. My parents immigrated down here when I was a baby, and we ended up in one of these little mountain villages. Why don't we just go there? Olivia asked. Trust me, Adam said. I'm not saying it's a perfect plan, but if you think that American is cocky and stupid enough to try and march his army up a mountain, it's a plan. He pointed Calvin in the direction of a road leading east. The sun was getting low in the sky behind them, and before long the sound of distant helicopter rotors cut across the mountains. Shortly after, the sounds of treads and diesel accompanied it, and then something else. It was a low, moaning sound, like an animal in pain. These sounds continued to pursue them, but didn't arrive before they pulled off the road and into a quiet, small, seemingly abandoned village. Calvin parked, and 3 of them climbed out of the Jeep, walking carefully towards the center of town. Privet? Adam called out. Hello? Is anyone here? The first glint of the setting sun on the helicopter blade poked around the mountain, and they ducked into a house. It was empty. Olivia looked around the room as Calvin posted up at the window. What happened here? Everything's still in place. It looks like whoever lived here before didn't take any of their stuff when they left. Adam grimaced slightly. We didn't. Suddenly, they heard a loud clattering come across the small town square. Something moved past the window, causing Calvin and Olivia both to draw their weapons. Adam held up a hand. You two need to chill, he said. At least for a minute. Don't shoot anything yet. They snuck out the back of the house and followed the ridge behind the houses to as far as the road, just across from where they heard the noise. They sprinted across the street to the house. The thin front door was standing open. Adam leaned inside and pulled a flashlight out of his bag. He pointed it inside and turned it on. A figure was standing in the far corner of the room. A shorter, rounder man, wearing thick, dirty shawl and no other clothes. His skin was pale and, in some places, unusually red. He was swaying slowly, and Calvin noticed something strange about his body was shaped, but he couldn't place it. Adam took a step inside, holding his hand out in front of him. Father Brahmamad? He asked in Russian. Is that you? The man turned slightly and looked at Adam. The right side of his face bulged significantly, as if something was pushing against his skin from underneath. When he saw Adam, the man smiled. Ah, little bird, the man replied. His speech was thick, and each word was accompanied by a spray of spittle. Welcome home. Adam looked at the man up and down. From their position outside, Calvin and Olivia could see Adam's face. It was somewhat resigned to sadness. He managed a weak smile. Father, Adam asked, where is everyone? Have they all left? The man tottered slightly towards Adam. No, little bird. They are here. They are all around us. The sickness came for them, just as it came for me. The man ran a thick hand across his bulging, exposed belly. It will come for us all in time. My ascension has nearly arrived. From outside the house, they heard some of the same animalistic roar from earlier, an eerie sound that stood their hair on end. Adam turned away from the sound back to the old man, who was now dragging a meaty leg across the floor towards him. He said something in Russian to Brahmamad, who uttered a slurred response. Adam turned back to the others. Something you both need to know, he asked, pulling a gun from his holster. When I was younger, people here started getting sick. Nobody could explain it. No cure seemed to help. As they got sicker, they would change. Like the guy back there, Calvin said. Adam cringed. Father Brahmamad is one of the last holdouts. People who got sick were sent into the mountains around here so they wouldn't infect anyone else, but the others got sick anyway. The Foundation eventually showed up and put those of us who were left to work cleaning out the mountains, but... He trailed off, his eyes growing wide. Calvin and Olivia turned their back behind them. Coming up the path of the mountain was a line of tanks, slowly crawling across the rock and gravel. Men in personal carriers and on foot followed behind, a long, winding column that stretched as far as they could see, and at the head of the line was the American, standing in his Humvee, smiling and holding a long, black whip. He brought it over his head and with a deafening crack pulled it down across the body of the creature in front of them. It was a massive, vaguely reptilian, with too many eyes and plodding green skin. It had a thick, oily strands of hair that dragged across the ground with every plodding step. Its mouth was long like a crocodile, but its teeth looked like those of a snake. Every time the American brought the whip down on the creature's back, it moaned in horrid, foul agony. As they drew near to the town, the overseer pulled a megaphone out from inside the vehicle and clicked it on. "You're a tricky son of a bitch, Calvin," he said, his voice amplified, echoing over the mountains that surrounded them. "I thought you'd be smart enough and stick to the road, where you could just keep going till you ran out of gas, but you're trapped here in the mountains. Nowhere to go now, boy." He cracked the whip again and the monster howled. "This here is my problem, folks. I can't seem to do anything with the big guy. Now, I'm not saying you can, but the way I see it, if I'm walking into this little gathering with two problems and leaving with one, I'll leave it up to you to decide what's it going to be." He hopped down from the Humvee and slapped the creature on the side, causing it to growl menacingly. He gestured towards the group with the whip and said something to the beast. Then, with an almost obscene viciousness, he brought the whip down on the creature several times in quick succession. It howled in rage and charged across the small dirt road towards where Calvin, Adam, and Olivia stood. They tried to run, but something waddling into the street caught their eye and made them hesitate. Father Brahmamad was standing between the charging reptilian monster and them, unmoving. The creature turned to charge, but then hesitated and came to a stop before reaching the old man. It leaned down to look at him, its eyes tightening. From deep within its gut they heard words, a voice deep and gnarled like the roots of an old tree. Not truly of this world, but unfortunately placed within it. "What is this?" The creature took another step forward. "Is filth." Father Brahmamad stumbled slightly, then gathered himself up. From where they were standing, they could see something moving just under his skin. It had begun to seep in some places, and blood now flowed out of his ears. He extended his arms wide and smiled. "I have ascended," he said, his voice sloppy with orgasmic stupor. "Hey!" the American shouted from his Humvee. "What the fuck in the goddamn— Hold up, you dirty—" Before he could finish the sentence, Father Brahmamad's skin split from the top of his head down to his groin. His eyes bulged and burst. His smile faded, pulled apart, and fell off to each side until his torso expanded rapidly. The reptilian creature recoiled, its eyes wide in confusion. The thing that had been Father Brahmamad collapsed to the ground and writhed there like an insect breaking free of its cocoon. After a moment it stopped moving and the town fell silent. Then came another sound, more horrible even than the moans of the reptilian creature. It came from the pile of flesh and meat on the ground and then echoed off the mountains. It was half a dying animal, half a regurgitated human cry of terror. The sound that came out of the pile was suddenly joined by many other similar sounds coming from the rocks and high places around them. The pile of meat began to writhe again, and coming up from an abomination. It was slick with blood and fluid, all pink and yellow and red. Its face, if it could be called that, was long and bore no noticeable features. It had many appendages, and more than that came unfolded from its back and hung a cabino from its sides. Father Brahmamad's loose skin lay discarded on the ground, but his hateful flesh screamed its birthing cry. The ground beneath them began to shake. There was a distinct sound of cracking rock as the nearby cliff face appeared to buckle and then collapse. The tumbling stone kicked up clouds of dust, and then the dust settled and there was nothing left but blackness. Out of that blackness came more cries, and then more from above. Another skin creature appeared on the ledge nearby, then another, then hundreds, then thousands, each of them screaming and writhing and dancing a hellish dance in the light of the setting sun. Then came a gunshot, and one of the flesh creatures stumbled and fell down the mountainside. The entire assembly stopped and watched as it crashed against the stone and came to a rest between two small shacks set up against the cliff. It lay there, unmoving, before writhing again and standing back up. It howled a ghostly howl, and then it began to approach the soldiers, more quickly than seemingly possible. More gunshots, and then the howls reached a fevered pitch, and the mass of flesh and gore crashed down the mountainside towards the 7th Infantry. At the head of the line was the lizard, who had now turned back with malice in its eyes at the writhing form of what appeared to be Father Brahmaman. It struck out with its long teeth, but the creature moved too quickly and slid around the lizard. Its long, meaty appendages stuck to its side of the massive reptile, who roared and clawed at its back as the flesh beast enveloped it. The ground beneath them shook again, and suddenly the ground was falling away. Below the cracks they could see hair and flesh and eyes, all staring skyward and full of blood and hate. Thick tendrils of flesh rose from the ground as the arid smell of gunpowder and smoke filled the air. All while more and more of the skinwalkers flew down the mountainside and out of the caves. Calvin had grabbed Adam and Olivia, and the three of them were now sprinting towards another Humvee, left abandoned by its previous occupants, who were now being pulled into the earth, screaming by a mass of hands and teeth. As they got near, one of the flesh things came running at him. Calvin threw a heavy kick at the creature, but its foot stuck in the but his foot stuck in the putrid mass of flesh and began to sink into the thing's skin. On its face, something that looked like a sucker opened up and began to descend towards Calvin before being removed by the rest of its body in a hail of bullets from Olivia's rifle. Her and Adam quickly grabbed Calvin by the arms and pulled him to the Humvee. Behind them were soldiers in full retreat. The mountains were broken open, and now massive, horrid, fresh monsters were crawling out towards the column of infantry, crushing vehicles and men alike. A helicopter overhead was destroyed when a truck had been launched into the sky, and it came crashing down to the earth, setting the path down the mountain ablaze. The skin creatures glistened and bubbled and screamed at the flames, but it did not stop the flood of them coming out of the ground. Calvin threw the Humvee in motion, and they flew, avoiding a flaming personnel carrier that had crashed into a nearby building. They drove past a church and then another row of houses and came out the other side of the main square. In the distance they could see fires and the flesh and the panicked soldiers packed together in a horrible crush of man and meat. Near them, however, in the middle of the town, was another scene entirely. The flesh beast that had once been Father Brahmamad had grown dramatically in size, and was now grappling with the lizard as the two tore at each other. Standing on the lizard's back, one hand wrapped around the thick chain that connected a spike driven into the lizard's spine, and another wrapped around the black whip, was the American. His hat had been knocked off, and his shirt was ripped and soaked with blood, but the ferocity in his eyes was that of a hound, racked with bloodlust and fury. He cracked the whip against the reptile's back, spurring it onwards as it cackled like a madman. "Get fucked, you ugly-ass meat goblin!" he shouted, yanking the chain left and right. I can't shout that as much as I would love to. My parents are asleep. He pulled the whip back behind his head and lashed it forward towards the flesh creature that had been Father Brahmamad, which recoiled from the strike. The reptile sank its teeth into the creature's fleshy exterior as they howled and screamed. Below the reptile, smaller flesh horrors were beginning to assemble like a sea of gore, swaying rhythmically in a horrific frenzy. As the lizard brought the meat beast to the ground, they could see the American again standing on the lizard's back and staring at them. His eyes were red with lust and hate. "You!" he roared, pointing the whip at the group. "You little whores don't go anywhere until I'm done. Fuck!" He was interrupted by Olivia shouldered her rifle and took a shot at him. The overseer brought up his whip again and ferociously caught the bullet in air, shattering it with a resounding pop. She fired again, and he caught it again. She fired it a third time out of rhythm, and the tip of the whip missed the bullet. The American stumbled and caught himself on the chain. His whip hand caught to his chest. When he pulled it away, it was covered in blood. Okay, but he destroyed a bullet midair with a whip. That's the coolest thing I've ever heard. And the American looked back at them. His face was covered in shock and disbelief, and he dropped the whip and started to idly rub the spot on his heart where blood was now cascading from. Calvin thought he could see the overseer start to say something, but before any words left his lip, he let go of the chain and toppled off the beast's back into the throng of howling meat beasts. They descended on him like ghouls, ripping and tearing off his body and incorporating them into his own. Then the mass of flesh descended upon the reptile, who finally succumbed into the weight of the massive flesh creature and all of the many thousands of the small creatures, and was pulled piece by piece into the earth. They sat on the ridge overlooking the small village until the last scrap of meat had been pulled away from the lizard's bones, and the tide of flesh began to rescend again into the mountains. Once the last of the meat monsters had disappeared, the reptile skeletons collapsed into dust, out of which crawled the tiniest of lizards. It emerged from the pile, shook itself off, shot a dirty look at Olivia, Calvin, and Adam, and scurried off into the hills. "Hell of a shot," Adam said, breaking the silence. "Yeah," Calvin said to nobody in particular. He was still staring at the spot where the American's body had fallen. All that remained was a red smear and crushed leather cowboy hat. "Adam," Olivia said hesitantly, "were those things?" "They were," he said. "Friends, family, people I knew. Once everyone started getting sick, there wasn't much stopping it. It wasn't a disease, not really. The air would get hazy sometimes, like it was full of pollen, spores maybe. You'd breathe them and you'd start getting sick and you'd go into the hills. My sisters went that way. My dad. Eventually, the Foundation showed up, stuck us in the orange jumpsuits, put flamethrowers in our hands, and set us out to burn back the infestation. He sighed. Our lives were hard enough. When we left Russia, we were being pursued, and anyone we didn't know could have been some hidden assassin. Finding this place and somewhere to hide was a godsend, and then this happened. He paused. I think for me, if someone tells me that there's a way to stop this sort of thing from happening, well, yeah, I'd be down for that. Calvin nodded. It's what Anthony would have wanted. They agreed. Calvin turned the wheel on the Humvee, and the three of them crawled into the mountains and away from the ruination of the 7th Infantry. As they came down the center of as they came around the corner of a narrow road through the mountains, they could see a city in the valley below them. Running towards the city was a road, and one they knew would take them further into China and toward civilization. Calvin was scanning the road, carefully watching even the slightest shadow out of place in the starlit night. Olivia was cleaning a rifle with the end of a thin paintbrush. Adam was looking out the window pessimistically. So, that's 7 down, right? Said the young man. The dead guy in the tower, the math guy, the multiple personality person who kidnapped Liv, the crazy snake lady, the one who killed herself, and the other one who killed himself, sorta, then Green and Mr. USA back there. He counted on his finger. Hang on, that's 8. Calvin snorted. Aren't you supposed to be the math one? Adam glared at him. Reliving traumatic moments from my youth have thrown me off my game today. Anyway, he continued, so who does that bring up next? They call him Blackbird, Olivia responded, not taking her eyes off her work. He's a strange one. The journal doesn't say anything about where to find him, just says that he has a way of showing up. I don't know what that means. Suddenly, Calvin stomped on the brake, sending Olivia and Adam into the dashboard and onto the floor, respectively. They scrambled up, each pulling a weapon as Calvin did the same thing and stepped out of the truck. Standing in the road in front of them was a small, strange-looking man. His eyes were slightly too big for his head, and he had a crooked nose with a neatly parted hair. He was wearing a 3-piece suit with a bow tie. In his jacket pocket was a silver pocket square with black crown embroidered onto it. As Calvin cautiously approached him, the man smiled warmly, extended his hands. Good evening, he said. I hear you're going to be looking for me soon, yes? That was convenient. Okay, I'm done. Those two were really long. I'm not even going to lie to you. Like, I don't know if I'm just slow or if these are longer. But but an hour for each would be 13 hours, and that's too much. That's too much. Ugh. God. Maybe I can be a voice actor. Maybe I don't got the gusto in me to talk for an hour straight. I don't know, man. As long as they give me water, I think I'd be fine, actually. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. The Foundation video I made like this is getting a lot of views for some reason. 350 views, which is really nice. I really love seeing that. So hopefully this will get some views too, huh? Thank you, and I wish you the best.